On the 17th of November, 2012, 34-year-old José Salvador Alvarenga finished his breakfast and bid farewell to his fellow fishermen in the coastal town of Costa Azul. There were rumors of a gathering storm out at sea, but Alvarenga wasn't worried. He navigated dozens of storms before. He felt sure that this one would be no different. He would be back, he assured his friends, in time for a party that evening. But this promise, it would turn out, would be one which Alvarenga would not be able to keep. José Salvador Alvarenga was born and raised in the small town in El Salvador, where he started a family. At 27, his life changed dramatically after a bar fight led to a series of escalating revenge incidents. Fearing for his safety, Alvarenga fled his home, leaving behind his wife, daughter, and after wandering for some time, he settled in Costa Azul, a fishing village on Mexico's Pacific coast. Alvarenga quickly became a well-liked member of the community. Known for his humor, generosity, and a hearty appetite, he made a living as a fisherman, often sharing his earnings with fellow fishermen and enjoying the camaraderie of life at sea. On the 17th of November 2012, Alvarenga made ready for another fishing trip. He had just returned from a very successful journey out to sea, bringing back an icebox full of fish worth hundreds of dollars. Now, although there was news of an incoming storm, he planned to double his money by making another trip out. His ship, known as Shrimper, from the coast number 3, was relatively basic. It had no structures and no running lights, and the anchor was missing, borrowed by a fellow fisherman. The biggest item on board was an icebox, where his bountiful catch would be stored. He would normally be accompanied by his colleague, Ray Perez, but on this day, Perez had an appointment that he could not miss. Impatient, Alvarenga recruited a rookie fisherman, 22-year-old Ezequiel Cordoba. Alvarenga and Cordoba sailed out to the open ocean and were soon engulfed by a fearsome storm. Before long, the pair were bailing out water out of the boat and desperately trying to keep it balanced amidst the massive rolling waves. Realizing their situation was precarious, the men turned the boat around and headed for home through the towering waves. They traveled through the night, and by 8 a.m. the next morning were within sight of home. It was at this point, however, that their engine died, leaving them at the mercy of the wind and the waves. Worse still, the missing anchor meant that they could not maintain their position. Very quickly, the storm began to carry them back out to sea. Alvarenga radioed for help. A boat was sent out, but it would have required a near miracle for it to find the two men at the height of the storm. By the time the weather had calmed and a proper search mission could be organized, Shrimper from the coast number 3 had drifted far away from shore. On board, waves swept away almost all of the men's food and equipment as they battled through the night. By dawn the next day, they were alternately taking shelter under the icebox and frantically bailing out the water from the boat. One day passed, then another. The storm abated, and the men found themselves adrift, with no sign of land in sight. With both their engine and their only radio dead, there was nothing they could do but wait as day by day they were carried further out to sea. After almost a week at sea, they did pass a container ship, but were unable to attract the attention of the people on board. The Shrimper from the coast number 3 was tiny, with a very low profile and dull coloring that made it almost invisible against the water. Days became weeks. The men sheltered uncomfortably under the icebox to protect their skin from the blazing heat of the sun. They drank their own urine and licked dew from under the surface of the boat. Alvarenga ate jellyfish, which he caught with his bare hands, ignoring the burning sensations they created in his throat and the pain upon his hands as he touched them. Later, with more practice, he was able to catch small fish, and seabirds too. Alvarenga one day caught a sea turtle, slaughtered it, and drank its blood. Cordoba, though painfully dehydrated, refused to do so. He did, however, eat the meat of the animal. Eventually rain did come, filling the boat with a slim pool of drinkable water that sustained the two men for days. By drinking rainwater and dew and eating fish, birds, and turtles, they were able to obtain the energy to survive. The experience was, however, taking a toll on their minds. They developed some routines to help with this. Cordoba, confused and desperate, would ask Alvarenga to go to the store and bring back food. Alvarenga would move to the far end of the boat, wait a few minutes, then return and explain that the store was closed, but that they could try again the next day. This routine, absurd though it might be, helped to keep Cordoba calm. The weeks became months. On what the men believed might be Christmas Eve, they ate a meal of seabirds. Cordoba's bird, however, had recently eaten a venomous snake. He became violently ill, and though he recovered, the incident left him fearful and unwilling to eat. Alvarenga now frequently had to talk him into eating and drinking enough to survive. Cordoba was undoubtedly deteriorating. He did not believe they would ever be rescued, and he was growing weaker day by day as he continued to refuse to eat. One night, the men made a pact. If only one survived, that survivor would visit the parents of the other and let them know how their loved one had passed. Not long after this, Cordoba passed away. Delusional with grief, Alvarenga continued talking to Cordoba's body for several days, as though nothing had happened. Eventually, though, as decay set in, he washed his companion's body and buried him at sea. Alvarenga was now entirely alone in what seemed like an endless ocean. He drifted into a shipping lane. As many as 20 container ships passed by his tiny boat, but Alvarenga could not attract the attention of any of them. Instead, he continued his routine of fishing and catching seabirds and turtles, sometimes keeping live animals in the boat to ensure his food supply. After some time, he found a floating oil drum, which allowed him to collect precious rainwater. With only one mouth to feed, and with his skills as a fisherman improving day by day, Alvarenga actually gained a small amount of weight. Food and water were always on his mind, but were no longer an emergency. As the boat continued to drift, he searched for ways to pass the time. He did push-ups to stay fit, decorated his hair with bird feathers, and repaired and maintained the boat. He made a dried-up pufferfish into a ball and watched his captive seabirds fight over it. Sometimes, he would talk to the sea, trying to convince it to drop him off on land. Most of all, though, he took refuge in his imagination. He later said that, "In my mind, I brewed fresh coffee every morning." As he drifted onward, he entered deeper waters where sea turtles could no longer be found. Food suddenly became scarce. He had kept a bird for several weeks at this stage, naming it Pancho. Reluctantly, Alvarenga was forced to slaughter and consume this bird, Pancho. He ate fish bones, hairs from his own beard, and even shreds of wooden plank. He even risked attracting sharks by jumping into the water to scrape barnacles for his boat, for sustenance. It was barely enough to keep him alive. Eventually, more than a year after he first became adrift at sea, Alvarenga spotted an island. He waited until the boat was almost ashore before driving into the water and crawling, finally, onto dry land. He was so weak by this stage that as he passed in and out of consciousness, he crawled up the small hill, a landmark that he later remembered as a mountain, and from there spotted a red shirt drying on a clothesline. After 438 days at sea, he had finally drifted back to civilization. He had landed on a relatively remote part of the Marshall Islands, where he was found by a couple who lived in a beach house. A language barrier prevented communication, but they fared and clothed him and sent a note to a nearby settlement to which Alvarenga was eventually transported. The days after his discovery were confusing. He did not know if he was under arrest or simply convalescing. He was repeatedly interrogated with immigration officials, doubting his story. Media interest in his case was huge, and he found the attention of the press unbearably stressful. At one stage, a journalist impersonated a doctor to try and get an interview from him. After much questioning, Alvarenga was eventually flown home. As he'd been missing for a year, he'd been declared dead, and a funeral service had long since been held for him. His sudden return home, therefore, was akin to a return from the grave. Alvarenga, though, was uninterested in the fame his miraculous story brought him. The news did, however, reunite him with his daughter. She visited him in the hospital while he recovered, and later he returned to El Salvador to visit her and teach her how to drive. Having survived a year at sea, he no longer feared the violence that had once driven him from his home. He also kept his promise to Cordoba and visited his family to describe his companion's final days. He explained that, while the days leading up to his passing were in no way easy or pleasant, when Cordoba did pass, he did pass away peacefully. Eventually, Alvarenga returned to Mexico and Costa Azul. He no longer works as a fisherman. He reportedly does not wish to relive or remember the 14 months he spent adrift in the Pacific. He is said to be happy, healthy, and immensely grateful to be alive.